I've always been creating media. Growing up, I've always been drawing and sketching and writing stories. And then I went into architectural studies. So I studied architecture for 6 years before I moved to Canada to go into journalism. So I feel very comfortable with the written word and with visual media as mediums that I could manipulate to communicate my ideas. So it was natural that when I had this project, this story that I wanted to tell, visual media was my go-to to communicate my thoughts and my ideas. The project that spurred me into doing something publicly is her sarong, which is a project about my grandmother. She passed away in 2012, and I was here and I wasn't able to go back for a funeral and get the closure that I needed. I found that I missed her a lot, and because I'm here and not in Malaysia, I didn't have the usual cues that would help me remember her. You know, the sounds and the smells and the sights, you know, the food and the taste, the language that would help me remember what life was like with her were not here. So I started recording and these things, and I started writing these things because I felt a fear that I might forget her. So that's when I started creating art based on this collection of her batik sarongs that she left behind, that my mother actually brought with her here to Canada. I also started writing short stories about what I remember about her so that I could always have her around me. The one thing that I often come up against, especially in studying journalism, is the narrow scope within which we talk about women of color or women in general and their relationship to labor and resilience. So this is one thing that I try to communicate through my stories, is that like, the narrative around resilient women and labor and beauty needs to be broadened so that when we think about women who are resilient, it includes women like my grandmother, who comes from a very different background, whose life has lessons for me as a woman of color and as a Muslim woman living in Canada. For people who look at my work, I really want them to understand that there is, there's a lot of beauty in the midst of struggle. That's what I discovered from my grandmother's life. That even though she grew up in poverty, raised by a single mother most of the time, and she also raised her family in poverty, there's also a lot of beauty that she brought into it, both physically because she took on the work of making batik sarongs, but also in terms of the love that she put into the family, right? And there are ways to hold both of those things, like the beauty and also the struggles. I know that it's not an easy thing to do for me personally, to talk about the difficult things in her life and also the beauty that she brought into it, and how both those things inform myself, my life now, and my identity as a Muslim woman. I'd like people to be able to understand how those things inform each other. For people who are impacted by my work, I would encourage them to continue supporting my work and also the work of other people like myself, because I think understanding who we are and where we come from is such an important and critical piece to understanding who we are and today, and how we fit into society today, and like imagining where we're going in the future.